As I mentioned, this presentation is part of some continuing work that I'm doing with Oracle and other organizations. And what spurred this particular presentation, over and over again, we see organizations lacking some type of strategic plan and evolutionary plan for service-oriented architecture. And it's often done piecemeal, typically started by the IT organization, without any real forethought to how things need to progress and evolve. And I touched on some of this in the presentation or in the webinar that I did this past fall. But one of the critical points is choosing where to begin with your service-oriented architecture initiatives and then planning where to go after that. There's so many different possible places you could start in an organization. I mean, the list is almost limitless. So how do you determine from the hundreds and hundreds of possibilities, maybe thousands of possibilities, where are you going to start and where are you going to go next? And making these decisions is critically important because this will set the tone for how your SOA initiative is perceived within the organization. And as in any organization, you're going to have your supporters and your detractors. So you need to really think through where we're going to start, where we're going to get the most benefit. We'll talk about some different criteria, and I'll suggest a high-level methodology for helping to make these decisions. But this is one of the most critical parts of determining the success and future evolution of SOA in your organization. Okay, so I'm going to suggest a 5-step process that we'll walk through, consisting of understanding the practical realities of your environment and of service-oriented architecture in general, and avoiding false promises, identifying the business pain, measuring the pain, selecting the pilot project, running the pilot project, and measuring the pain and getting credibility. So we'll run through these steps, and then I'm going to suggest a methodology that we're in the process of developing to help you make some of these decisions. Okay, understanding the practical realities. Too often, I think I've sure seen people that fall into approach one, where we have our SOA evangelists or crusaders, and I'm obviously a SOA enthusiast, or I wouldn't be sitting here today. But at the same time, I try to put a dose of reality on all of this stuff. I've seen in some organizations people that they're evangelizing SOA, and they want the whole organization to see what they see and do this enterprise-wide change effort, SOA effort, and have it really do too much too soon. And I haven't seen any of these approaches be successful. They're trying to take on too much and trying to change too much too fast. Most of your senior management, as I'm sure you're all aware, have very little idea. I think that's slowly changing over time, but for the most part, have very little idea of what SOA means and can bring to the table. And most of them have heard some of the benefits attributed to SOA before, and have, especially if they've been around for a while, have had failed promises that have failed to meet their expectations in the past, so they might be a bit jaded. When you're talking about all the potential of SOA, I think you're going to have your skeptics, to say the least. So I think you need to start and plan a gradual strategy to build credibility, not try to take on the whole world at one time. The second approach, so the SOA Crusader, though they exist, typically isn't very successful. Another approach might be, and this is what's typically done perhaps with IT organizations, they'll select a project for SOA implementation, aggressively market it as a SOA solution, and get it working, but not really plan, and we'll talk about what this planning involves, plan a strategy around SOA evolution. And oftentimes, SOA gets attributed to a particular type of solution in this case. So, okay, we think we understand it now. It's good if you want to do X. And it gets somewhat misrepresented, mislabeled, pigeonholed into a particular type of solution. And you need a much more business-focused and broader strategic perspective of SOA, I believe, to make it successful and to get people to understand it slowly over time and see the benefits that it can bring to the organization. So instead, as I alluded to already, a much more gradual, low initial investment, credibility, heavily business-linked approach is the most likely approach for long-term success. And I think long-term is the key word here as well. I'm going to reinforce this. You're looking at, to get started in most organizations, a 3 to 5 year startup period. I read an article recently from, I believe it was from Gartner, that most organizations feel it's going to be 15 plus years until they have a large chunk of their infrastructure SOA enabled, and that's probably realistic. Oracle and SAP estimate they'll have most of their applications SOA ready by about 2013, 2014 or so, and then you're going to have a large migration and adoption period after that. So we need to think long-term, slow baby steps, gradual credibility building. I apologize. I have a bit of a sore throat today, so if my voice cracks a bit, I apologize. Step 2, identifying the business pain. We're going to spend a lot of time on this in a few moments. But obviously, when we want to undertake an initial project, a credibility building project, we want to solve some major pains of the organization. And identifying, and most organizations have, an abundant amount of pain. So identifying those processes that have the pain and are good candidates for SOA and meet some other criteria to help ensure our initial success, that's not such an easy thing. I've seen organizations where they'll go in, and I've seen some major consulting firms do this as well. I think people are becoming a bit more astute over time. But they'll go in and ask a department, well, where do you think your best candidates for SOA lie? Well, that's assuming that people understand what SOA can bring to the table, and that's getting a narrow perspective that may be a perspective that fits for that particular unit, but it may not be the best credibility building project or processes for the entire organization. So it's really kind of done haphazardly today in most organizations. That's why I think there's a need for a bit more structure and some thought around this. So I think the last paragraph here, IT knowledge and technology priorities are secondary to process knowledge and business priorities. We need to focus on where are we going to get the most credibility and bang to the business. And as I mentioned, enterprise architecture is something that's one of our focus areas. And I think, and I'm going to hit this a bit further in the presentation, but having people with that perspective that understand the business, the strategy components, as well as have an understanding of what the technology can do is crucial to really making SOA an enterprise-wide initiative and make it an enterprise-wide success. Okay, like I said, we'll come back to this in a lot more detail. When you select the pain, it's got to be measurable. We're not going to be able to make a case that we made a difference if we can't measure it. So that there's got to be some historical data of how things were done pre-SOA and be able to compare that to our SOA implementation. If you don't have that data and you can't measure it, then it's all anecdotal, and that's not going to carry any weight with the C-level people, and it's not going to silence your detractors either. Selecting the pilot project. Most critical step in all of this, and we're going to spend spend quite a bit of time in talking about a process for selecting this process, or selecting the project.